All right. Hello, hello, hello. We're just going to give a second for folks to come in and say hi, get settled before we jump in. I know a lot of times we'll start with just kind of a fun question while we wait for folks to get settled. So if anybody wants to drop in the chat a favorite fun summer activity or something that you are the most looking forward to this summer, and I'll ask our panelists too, if there's anything that you're excited about this summer, a big summer activity. Alex, anything you're pumped about for the summer?
Learning to drive.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm not.
Okay, that is a big one.
But
stay off the sidewalks, everyone. Stay off the sidewalks.
Yeah, stay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, I love that. That's awesome. Patrick, anything you're excited about for this summer?
Hanging out at the IOCDF International OCD Foundation Conference in Denver. Boop, boop. Yeah, that'll be fun.
Awesome. And Jed, any excitement for the summer?
I'm going to be in Vermont next week, which is sort of my happy place for a week vacation. Pretty excited about that.
That is awesome. And I'll echo Patrick. I'm so excited about the conference in Denver. I know we're heading out there to Estes Park the week before. Going to do some Red Rocks Amphitheater and some Blues Traveler for July 4th. So lots of fun around the IOCDF conference. So as folks come in, feel free to let us know if there's something that you're super excited about for the summer or a favorite summer activity. And I'll go ahead and jump into our introduction here. So, and Ethan is excited to grow taller this summer. Yes.
Does Ethan have to come to the conference, by the way? That's all I have.
I suppose. Okay, so let's see. So this live stream is educational and is not intended to replace therapy. For treatment-related questions, please work with your provider or contact a local clinician. You can use the IOCDF's online resource directory at iocdf.org/find-help to locate a trained clinician near you. The International OCD Foundation is not a crisis hotline. If you're in a crisis or if you're ever feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room or call 911 or the suicide prevention hotline at 800-273-8255. And finally, we want to create as safe a space as possible. We always want to be kind and respectful to everyone. At the end of the day, we're all here to support one another. And we know that this can be a topic that's really significant to folks. So we're going to be as inclusive as possible, talking about lots of different faith traditions, but also want to note for folks in the chat that this is being broadcast on several social media platforms and is being recorded. So please keep that in mind and just be kind to one another. And I'm going to go ahead and jump into bios so we can get started on our conversation today. And as I'm going through that, if folks have questions that they want to go ahead and start asking about separating faith from OCD or anything that pertains to faith, OCD, religious scrupulosity, you can go ahead and start dropping those in the chat. And we're going to get to as many as possible with our panelists. So first, we have Dr. Patrick McGrath. Dr. McGrath is a licensed clinical psychologist and the chief clinical officer at NoCD. He is a member of the scientific and clinical advisory boards of the International OCD Foundation, a fellow of the Association for Cognitive and Behavioral Therapies, and an author of the OCD Answer Book and Don't Try Harder, Try Different. Then we have Dr. Siev, who is an associate professor of psychology at Swarthmore College and a licensed clinical psychologist. Previously, he directed the Anxiety Treatment Center and founded the OCD and Related Disorders program at Nova Southeastern University after completing training at the Massachusetts General Hospital and the University of Pennsylvania. Jed's research focuses on information processing, judgment and decision-making, and metacognitive processes involved in the maintenance and reduction of OCD, hoarding, and anxiety. And he has a particular interest in unacceptable thoughts, and especially scrupulosity. He's currently writing a book for Oxford University Press on how to treat scrupulosity. And then finally, we have Alex Rosenberg. Alex just graduated from high school, but he was diagnosed with OCD when he was 10 years old. He has been incredibly active as an advocate from an early age, including putting together a bunch of his own educational resources and flyers for distribution at his school. At one of his first annual OCD conferences, he sought out the IOCDF National Advocate Ethan Smith to ask how we could do more to make sure everyone could get treatment when he was still in middle school at the time. Now he serves as an incredibly active and positive IOCDF advocate with a particular commitment to our faith and OCD initiatives. Even while abroad in Israel, he was jumping online at 2 o'clock in the morning to be a part of all of the faith and OCD stuff that we are doing. So he continues to be a really essential part of that, and really such an expert on Jewish texts and scrupulosity, collaborating with his rabbi. So we're so excited to have him as a speaker at the Faith and OCD conference, a speaker at our upcoming conferences, and also here with us tonight. So thanks for being here, everyone. And for anybody I might not know who's on here, I'm Katie. I always like to note I'm pretty informal. I just like to put the Reverend title so folks know that ordained ministers and clergy do, in fact, have OCD, and that's okay. There's no shame around that. So I'm an IOCDF lead advocate. I'm a minister who is very open about OCD, intrusive thoughts, and all of the things. And I'm also the founder of Faith and Mental Health Integrative Services, where I get to try to bridge the gap between clinicians and clergy around all things religious scrupulosity. So excited to be here and to go ahead and dive in. And I'm going to go ahead and start asking some questions. Ooh, we have Val in the house. We have Mike. We have Ethan's mom, Liz. So we've got a nice crew here. So I want to go ahead and just throw this out to our group, and just to get us started on this faith and OCD topic. I have a hunch we're going to be talking a lot about religious scrupulosity. So either Patrick or Jed, would one of y'all just give us a little definition of what religious scrupulosity is and why we might be talking about this in a conversation on OCD and faith?
Okay, I'll take it. Well, with OCD, it's the doubting disorder, right? So let's keep that in mind first. And anything that you can doubt, OCD would love to grab onto. So why wouldn't OCD also grab onto religion as well, too? Faith may be a very important thing to you. Religious belief important to you. Your afterlife a very important thing to you. And OCD will say, but what if, right? What if you did something wrong? What if you committed the unpardonable sin? What if you didn't say that prayer just right? What if 1,000 years from now, though you're married here on the earth, which means that you will be married for eternity, what if in 1,000 years from now, you don't really like each other? So you might have a mix of some relationship OCD that goes into some of that scrupulosity as well, too. But really looking at it from the perspective of doubt, if there's something that you can doubt about religion, and there's also moral scrupulosity, which we could do an entirely different show on, right? But if you could doubt something about religion in terms of if you've done something right, if you've done something wrong, if you've made a mistake, and if it could potentially affect how you are here living on the earth, and if it could also potentially affect what happens after you're no longer here as well. Those would be the areas that you would see in religious scrupulosity.
And I love that you pointed out that it's really, again, OCD latching onto the things most significant to the sufferer, because I end up hearing from a lot of folks, well, why would OCD attack my faith? And this is the one thing, right?
Why wouldn't it attack?
Exactly. But we hear from a lot of folks, and I'm sure y'all hear this too. Well, my faith is the one thing that I can't sit with uncertainty about, which we'll definitely get into that tonight. But I think it tends to be, again, OCD is attaching to the thing most important to you, which for so many people is that faith component.
Because we hear the same thing from people with other themes of OCD. My relationship is the one thing that I can't have doubt about. The idea that I might harm someone is the one thing that I can't have doubt about. Well, that's because that's potentially the most important thing to you. And so that's why OCD is grabbed onto it. That's
exactly right. So I hope folks heard that loud and clear. If you're someone who's saying, why my faith, that it makes a lot of sense that it's your faith that it's attached to. And Jed, I would love to hear, so if someone comes to you and they are navigating religious scrupulosity, what might treatment for that look like?
So you're going to have to find ways to sort of train yourself to be able to live without uncertainty and that doubt that you all were just talking about. And so that's going to mean finding ways to disentangle and to distinguish between the OCD rules and the actual religious rules, and violating the former without crossing whatever lines there might be for the latter. So you are, OCD is sort of masquerading as religion, and you got to figure out which parts are really OCD and violate those over and over, the same way you do with any kind of exposure for OCD. At the same time, you want to be respectful of a person's values. If somebody is just adhering to the religious rules, maybe they have some conflict about internal conflict about their feelings about that. That's perfectly fine too, but that's not necessarily about OCD. So there's got to be some stuff that's happening in a person's religious practice if their OCD has latched onto that, that is either excessive or overly rigid or is manifesting in a way that is being driven by the OCD. And we're going to target that and do exposure to it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jed. So I would love to hear Alex, and then we'll start to get into, well, how can we maybe separate faith from OCD? How do we go about that process? But Alex, you have lived experience with this topic. So I'd love to hear, what did this look like in your life? What did faith and OCD look like? How were you able to determine what's faith, what's OCD? How did these exposures actually look when you were going through the process that a lot of our listeners might be going through?
Yeah, so it's been kind of tricky, in a lot of ways. I've personally become more religiously observant than my family, and my immediate family, that is. And I had an incredibly inspiring rabbi who I still consider to be my rabbi. He was from my high school. Even though I've graduated, I'm still in contact with him. And he, showed me that this is really a thing about love. And I just realized from being with him how meaningful it is. But the problem is, now I am abiding by practices that not even my immediate family has. And I also have OCD. So, my family is saying, well, isn't this just excessive? Are you doing all of these things because your OCD wants you to? And there have been times when, my family has thought it was OCD. And I knew, I was like, hey, Mom, who's actually in this room with me, I was like, Mom, this is not actually my OCD. This is, just my religious faith. And so that line has been difficult to draw, but thankfully, we've had a bunch of communication. My rabbi has just been incredibly communicative with me, and as well my parents. And my therapist has had experience, I believe, working with faith leaders as well. And so I think communication has been a really important thing for me. And also, I think just having done therapy and done the exposures, I've kind of come to get a certain sense of what's my religion, what's my OCD. It's not the kind of thing where you can have a strict criteria. You can draw a very easy line. There's some things that I still can't really decide occasionally. But I think through communication that can give us a guideline, and through practice we can kind of, use our foundation and kind of strengthen that kind of understanding.
Mm-hmm. And I love that you're talking about that collaboration. And that's something I know that with the IOCDF initiatives that we have Skyla putting in the chat behind the scenes, that's something we've really been working on, this important relationship between clergy or between faith leaders and the clinicians to really help separate, well, what's someone's faith from what's their OCD. And Alex, you've been in an interesting position as someone who's more observant than your family, of maybe family saying, well, is this your OCD? And you say, well, no, this is actually a part of my faith, and having to parse out what that looks like. So I wonder, and I would encourage folks as you're jumping on to drop your questions in the chat, because we know that you would like to hear the answers to your questions and not just what I think is interesting. But for getting started, Patrick, how, and this can be in a specific case or more generally, but how do you go about starting to separate, well, this is what's actually value driven for someone with their faith versus this is what OCD is telling them to do?
There's a couple of things I like to look at. Number one, let's say if you're Catholic and you're suddenly having to be holier than the Pope, then maybe we're seeing some behavioral experiences that are going on that are giving us some warning signs. If every what if question has to be answered to the point of 100% no doubt, right? And there's always that problem in OCD where the nickname of the doubting disorder means this. I'm going to doubt everything and demand that you give me answers to quell my doubt. But because I doubt everything, I'm also going to doubt the answers that you give me to try to get rid of my doubt, which means that you'll never actually fully satisfy me. So I'll always doubt you. And if you find yourself in these endless loops, that's another great warning sign that this is an obsessive compulsive disorder kind of concern that's going on. You also have to take a look at the level of belief someone has in terms of the fundamentalistic aspect of it, right? So if you read a word, is it a guide or is it an absolute? So if you read it in such a way that says no doubt is allowed, then that basically means that no human will ever fulfill that, and therefore no human can achieve that kind of level. OCD will look at it as saying, though, oh, wait a minute, you have to achieve that. You can't have one iota of doubt whatsoever about this, and it can never creep into your life. And Katie, I think someone like you is a great example who puts out there that you have OCD, which means that you can talk about doubt, and yet you're still a reverend too, and you can have a faith system as well. So no doubt you've had doubts and been able to kind of go through them in your life. And so I love that you are the example of that to people. And I think it's wonderful that you put yourself out there to show people that it is acceptable to experience wonder and all of these things in your life. And it doesn't mean that you're a bad religious person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And thank you for that, Patrick. And that was on the personal side, a journey for me, because I spent so long, particularly as someone who's my main themes related to harm and false memory and a lot of moral scrupulosity. I felt like an absolutely horrific person. And I felt like I didn't deserve to be a minister. I felt like I didn't deserve to be in this public role where I was serving as an interfaith chaplain for a lot of kids. I felt like I didn't deserve to have people look up to me in that capacity. And eventually, when starting to be more public about my OCD, it was the opposite of everything that I thought. People actually respected me in that role more because they realized, oh, wait, she experiences those same things that we're experiencing. And I think for me, that doubt and that questioning is really a part of faith. Faith isn't about being absolutely certain. It's about having questions and making the choice to lean into the values that are meaningful to you anyway. And I always tell folks that, you can have faith, but if you have a faith leader who gets up and says, I am 10,000% certain this is right, they're probably lying to you. I'm pretty, open about the fact that I'm a faith leader and I don't know that I have the right answers. And I think that's okay. And that's a healthy place to be with OCD or without OCD.
Yeah.
So I wonder, Jed, do you have any additional pieces on separating out for clients? What's faith? What's OCD? What does that look like?
Yeah, I suspect that in different religious traditions, you have to pay attention to slightly different kinds of things. For example, a lot of Orthodox Jews with scrupulosity are very caught up in specific legal requirements, more than sort of overall questions of faith and doubt in that sense. So in a situation like that, I would say, first of all, you could use other people as sort of a benchmark. Are you acting like other people who are otherwise sort of, in your peer group and that sort of thing? And are you behaving like them? And if not, just like, even with contamination OCD, it's not usually the most helpful thing if somebody has contamination obsessions to get into debates about fractional elevations in risk because actually somebody walked around Manhattan and they swabbed the bottom of the shoe and really there is gross stuff growing. Right? Yeah, not the point though. The point is how people can live and are willing to live. So you can benchmark against other people. I think you need to pay attention to what's motivating it. It is if fear and misery is the driving force behind the behavior, like if somebody washed their hands, back to contamination, 30 times in 20 minutes, you wouldn't say they're very clean. They're compulsing. They're doing rituals. And so same sort of thing, there's nothing special about religious behaviors or hand washing or any other kind of thing that is frequently co-opted by OCD. The same behavior, and it's, if you're a surgeon and you're about to go in and operate, you should be scrubbing up, and in a way that people don't usually scrub up, but that's the healthy thing to do in that context. And so hand washing is not good or bad, and prayer is not good or bad. And in that sort of sense. It how are you doing it? When are you doing it? Why are you doing it? And then, you know, just attention to functionality. Religion, at least I guess I can't speak to any possible sort of new religious expression or whatever, but, you know, the religions that have sort of stood the proverbial test of time, most people function okay in those religions, especially vis-a-vis these sorts of issues. You can even, you know, you can think of confession, for example, as a mechanism to set things right. With an understanding that you're going to mess up. You're not supposed to do this, but you're probably going to sometimes do things you're not supposed to do. And here's a way to make it better. And then sort of there's this irony, of course, that say a Catholic with scrupulosity may be way overusing confession or using it, you know, OCD has latched onto it in that sort of way. So just functionality, the ability literally to function with this practice in a way that still allows you to have a normal life, whatever normal exactly means. So those would be sort of the three other considerations that certainly are not completely different from what Patrick was saying, but maybe dovetail with them.
Yeah, and I'm glad that was actually going to be my next question of what it means when we look at kind of the function of a ritual, because I think it can be hard within faith traditions because someone might say, well, other people in my tradition pray, but that function becomes really important. And just to give some other religious examples, you know, there might be a different function for someone who is performing puja, who does have OCD or who doesn't have OCD within Hinduism. Of why are you doing this? Are you doing it in this particular way or at this particular time to alleviate anxiety? Are you doing it because you are experiencing fear or because you're experiencing guilt? Or are you doing it because it's something that's meaningful and value driven to you? So I think it's really interesting to think about, why is someone doing it? And is it because they're fearful? Is it because they're feeling guilty? Or is it because, well, this is a part of their religious practice and it's meaningful? But I wonder, it can be hard to separate.
Yeah, Katie, if I can just follow up with one other observation, which is that, and yeah, it's normal, I think, for all of us in some areas of our life that at least some of the time, various normal, everyday, day-to-day sort of things can feel burdensome. It's a pain to sometimes have to take care of things that you have to take care of at work or with your family or whatever, and religious obligations as well. So I don't think that we'd want to go as far as to say, you know, if the reason you're doing it isn't that it gives you fulfillment and meaning. Or there's plenty of stuff in life that maybe when you zoom out gives you fulfillment and meaning, but in any particular moment, you'd really much rather be, you know, I don't know, whatever you like to do to recreate than have to deal with that, you know. Any parent changing diapers and like, yeah, right. It's and that's okay with religion too. You can make a sort of values driven commitment that you adhere to a system, even if there are times when adhering to that system is challenging or you know, takes a force of will or something like that. That's okay. We're talking more like if it's the overall dominant experience of it, if that's what drives you overall. If that gets in the way, actually, most people with scrupulosity, with religious scrupulosity, find and report that their symptoms interfere with their relationship with God or their religious observance. It's not actually, I mean, ostensibly, supposedly, it's to be sure that I'm not messing up or whatever it is. In the same way that checking is ostensibly to be more sure that you didn't leave the stove on or the door unlocked. But it actually, in the big picture, interferes with that. So again, not to say that you never don't experience just, you know, this warm, fuzzy kind of thing. But really the overall reason why you're doing it, the overall experience and the way that it contributes to how you relate to it meaning whatever religion is for you.
Mm-hmm. And are you doing the behaviors you're doing in service of religion or in service of OCD? Correct. If the whole goal is to alleviate the obsession, that is not a religious move you're making. You are making an OCD move in that kind of situation. Now, OCD is a conniving jerk who will try to convince you that, oh, no, you're not doing this for me. No. This really is a religious issue. So you really do need to do it. But I see a lot of my job trying to help people recognize that very experience, that if this truly was a religious thing, everyone else in your religion would be doing this as well too. So since they're not, let's focus on the OCD aspect of this and see what's really happening here.
Yeah, and that's where we end up talking about that. It almost feels like some folks end up worshiping the OCD while they're trying to worship God or trying to live into their faith as they're responding maybe to that OCD component. So Alex, I see you nodding a little bit. I wonder what this looks like in your own experience.
Yeah,
Have you
I'd
been
love to hear that.
about kind of the functional piece and what's OCD and what's not? Do you have any specific examples of stuff that has come up for you around this topic?
Yeah, so it can sometimes be a little bit difficult. Often, I think that like I can kind of feel when something is more OCD than religion. And it kind of feels more like an anxiety type feeling ish and less, less in this, like it feels kind of a bit of like an outlier, but I think that's kind of a thing that I've come to, I think therapy has actually helped me with that a little bit, but just recently, like this is something I've actually struggled with pretty recently is that sometimes I'm worried that I did not say all the words properly in a prayer, or like I did not pronounce them correctly. And so I then will like go back and say them again. But, I've kind of, I feel like when that has happened, because I've worked on OCD with therapy, I've been able to kind of tell when I can really understand, I did not, I completely, my tongue slipped while I was saying this word. I completely, I completely botched it. But usually, when it's OCD, it generally feels like I know I did it right. It's just that I don't feel like I did it right. Mm-hmm. And so, so there's that side of things. And I mean, there's also been, conflicts with my family in terms of like my family wanting me to eat with them at a non-kosher restaurant. And then the question is, what do I eat then? And so that's, I think with OCD, the hardest things are usually where the OCD is hardest to manage, because they're, some of those things are really complicated and really do not have a simple answer either way. So, in those kinds of cases, I've usually talked to my rabbi about it, and if needed as well, my therapist. So, yeah, those are just a couple examples.
No, those are great. And I love that you brought up that feeling piece, which can also be can be tricky. And I wonder for Patrick or Jed, I know we hear from folks all the time, well, it feels like my faith, so how could it be OCD? And how can I think, why might it feel like it's important to me? Why might it feel like I'm doing something for my faith when it's really my OCD pulling me in that direction?
One observation just to get that started is that feelings are, when they're working well, are probably great signals of a lot of things, right? When you're feeling scared, that's in theory a good indication, right? It's sort of like a smoke detector alarm going off or something. It gives you information, maybe helps you communicate information. But in areas that OCD has latched onto, any judgments that are based on how you feel are too subjective and fuzzy and open to OCD co-opting it. And so sort of as a rule, when I'm working with people, I say as a rule, meaning I suppose maybe there are exceptions in specific cases, but we don't want to pay a lot of attention to somebody feeling like I feel like this is dangerous. I feel like that this is, we have to make decisions that are in some ways a little more intellectualized, actually. Not that we don't want to pay attention to emotions. Of course we want to pay attention to emotions, but it's just lousy information. And, especially in the area that OCD is latched onto, sort of we have a default, we have a status quo that you have your smoke detector, so to speak, here has a bad battery. And it's going off all the time right now in situations where it may or may not be indicating a real problem. And so, if you have that smoke detector that needs a battery changed and you haven't bothered to change the battery, so every time you fry eggs, it goes off. And at some point, you got to decide, like, you know, if you run out of the house like you were trained to do every time it goes off, first of all, you're never going to get to work. Or you're going to have to just eat cereal, and you're never going to get to have those eggs that you like to
Where's
have.
my eggs? That's what I want.
Yeah. So, but on the other hand, you know, so how do you know that an electrical fire didn't start at the exact same moment that you started frying the eggs, and really it's telling you, right, yeah, but you have to sort of decide, am I taking this signal seriously right now? Or is there enough evidence that it's not worth taking seriously that I'm just going to stay in there and make the eggs? And if you stay in there and make change the battery. But if you're going to stay in there and just make the eggs, the parallel continues, because, it'll be really annoying. Having to sit through that really loud, unpleasant sound will not be easy, will not be fun, but you'll get to have your eggs and you'll get to work on time. And so, my starting place is to assume that it feels like it's religion. I want somebody to explain to me. I want them to articulate their moral judgment criteria or something. Well, how do you know? How do you decide? On what basis? And I'm sure there are huge differences across religions about how to make those kinds of decisions. You know, one thing that is easier for me, at least because I'm so familiar with it, with, say, Orthodox Judaism, which has tons of all these little rules and regulations that OCD can latch onto. So in a sense, it's fertile ground for the problem. But one thing that's easier is that they're sort of legalistic answers and solutions, and there are boundaries. And people disagree, but there's a line somewhere. And so, you know, it's no longer so subjective. And so there might be other religions where it's not quite as clear cut in those ways, but the answer is still going to be more like, how can you articulate what you believe to be the right criteria to make this judgment, rather than saying it feels this way to me and therefore it is. That's basically emotional reasoning.
I love that. And I've really loved getting to work with you and learn so much about the legalistic kind of component with Orthodox Judaism, and how, I'm knocking over my coffee cup. I'm getting so excited about religious freedom. But that's been, I think, so impactful and made me really appreciate the work we do with the Faith Task Force and all of these components with the IOCDF. But I love the smoke detector analogy. And I was laughing because I'd never heard that analogy used, where you also said, oh, and maybe there was an electrical fire at the same time. And I think that's to a T exactly. And Alex is laughing too. What my brain says every time I'm like, oh, probably OCD. No, but this really could be, it could be the time, right? That something else bad is going on, that you actually have to do this. And I see Ethan in the chat laughing, because we actually had a situation where all of our smoke detectors were going off every 20 seconds at different intervals a couple of weeks ago. That's a different conversation. But I think that's it's such a great analogy. So Patrick, I wonder what you think when folks are bringing up the feelings with you as well, about feelings versus facts. And I'm sure you have thoughts on this.
I feel like it's just another veiled way to say I doubt. Mm-hmm. I mean, frankly, that's what it is. It feels like is just what if in another form. And to me, everything goes back to that what if question, right? What if kind of thing. You know? And a lot of it goes then to interpretations that we make. Go biblical for a moment, go to original meanings of sin, which was, hey, you missed the mark, try again. And today sin means you're going to hell, you know, and how bad, awful, horrible. And so I like to just kind of remind people that, again, OCD is going to always do this for you. OCD is going to tell you, you have to be perfect, right? And that's the only thing. So Alex, I love what you said about prayer, right? Because that's a great example when you're saying a prayer. What if you got something wrong? But here's the problem. If you have to do it perfect, and you believe that your higher power exemplifies perfection, right? So now you, a human who is a flawed being, has to become perfect, means that you have to become God in order for God to accept you, right? So now how do you do that, right? How do you suddenly become perfect in something, right? Well, OCD will always say, oh, well, there is a way to do it. You just have to find it. And if you don't find it, it means you're a bad, awful, horrible person. And it feels like you're not trying hard enough. And it feels like you could do better at this, and throws that at you to punish you and to motivate you to try to do more of what OCD wants you to do than what is really healthy for you. So watch out for the trickery of that OCD, because it's always going to get you to try to do more to serve it, than it is to do anything else.
Yeah, I mean, on the talk of, like what things feel like, I think another important thing, just to reiterate, is that it does feel like, my religion is telling me I have to do this. I do think at the same time, as I'm striving further and further towards perfection, I start to feel down and anxious. And I start to feel like kind of, that the religious rituals are less vibrant and less meaningful in that kind of a way. And so I think there is definitely a way, it's not like the kind of thing where you're in some sort of a fantasy world. No, like I think you can tell when it's OCD and when it's not. It's just that, it does take practice, because sometimes our brains try to trick us.
And even if you can tell, there's still, but what if this time? Like, again, like the electrical fire, a great example.
Fire this time. Yeah.
There's what if, and there's what if's cousin, which is, yeah, but what if? And we got to watch out for both of them. Mm-hmm.
If I can just add one other thing, which is that, so you put this question to us as about sort of, it feels like it's religion. And I just want to acknowledge, I hear Ted Witzig a lot. Ted works with a lot of Protestants with fundamentalist Protestants, especially.
That's awesome. Mm-hmm.
And he observes that, especially with his folks, there's a lot of somatic kind of checking too. So when we talk about it feels like, there's, I understood you, Katie, to be talking about a more general, almost like an emotional kind of feeling, or like a subjective judgment. But there is that, the analyzing a physical sensation kind of feeling thing that can be grabbed by Scrup as well. Things like, am I really at peace about something? And sort of analyzing body responses and interpreting them in different sorts of ways. And those of you who are familiar with other kinds of body checking stuff that happens with OCD, for example, people who have obsessions about sexual arousal or something, it's so, again, inherently subjective. And how do you know what you're supposed to feel and what that would even mean? And then anxiety is a form of arousal as well. So when you're anxious, you are in a physical sense aroused in some sense. And it's all of these problems too. And I just wanted to be explicit in saying that the problems with it feels a certain way are also about physical interoceptive sensation kind of feels.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think sometimes we miss the mark in talking about that. And I actually offline end up getting this question from folks a lot of, well, what if I'm having this physical sensation or this physical feeling? And what does that mean? Is that still a part of this? So I'm really glad you pulled that in. I'm mindful of our time, so I'm going to go ahead and start diving into some of our questions in the chat here. And this one actually at 7:17 isn't as much a question, but I think it can turn into one for this group. And Mike Sizemore at 7:17 says that he spent an enormous, exhausting amount of time trying to proving to himself the factual proof of his religion. And he goes through all sorts of different things that he's been doing. In the end, he said, his faith was his faith prevailed. But I think what I'm curious to this group about is, if you're hearing from someone, I think there's this line, like, Alex, I know you really enjoy studying your religious tradition. And I know sometimes I'll work with folks with OCD who enjoy studying theology or who enjoy studying religious history. How do you separate the passion component from a compulsion of going back and trying to prove to yourself that your religion is correct? And I'll throw this out for anybody in this group.
Yeah, I mean, I think that with everything with religion, and just with life in general, when someone has OCD, nothing is like safe and nothing is untouched. At least nothing is guaranteed to be untouched by OCD. So, even the very fundamental questions about religion, does God even exist? Or is this even the right religion? No, we're not even talking about, is this the right way of practicing this religion? No. Is this the right religion in general? Even that, I think, is subject to OCD and is, subject to that kind of a thing. And honestly, I think that it is pretty similar to other things. I think that, you can kind of tell when things are OCD to a certain extent, although some of it is a little bit deceptive. You need to have communication as a guideline. You need to do therapy. I think, in order to get kind of strength and muscles in your toolbox or tools in the toolbox to, combat it. But I think that just because it's a different type of thing, it's not necessarily a different way of handling it strategically.
Patrick, Jed, any thoughts on that for folks who might be separating from between studying and trying to prove?
I mean, the thing that comes to mind first for me is some of the what's driving it, like what's on the line, checking and feeling the need to prove without any doubt that something is true with, for anxiety related reasons, has a certain sort of flavor to me that's different from somebody who's either really interested in the subject or even really motivated to find, listen, I could imagine somebody who for non-OCD reasons would feel like there was still a lot on the line in a case like that in sort of an existential sense, like my whole belief system, like I'm not really sure. And I'm having all these doubts and trying to study as much as I can to make decisions. There can be a lot on the line for an individual in that situation in ways that I don't want to just say has to be OCD. So it's not as simple as just saying, are the stakes unreasonably high or feeling the need to prove something 100%. It's really the combination of all that and really the anxiety component. I'd be really curious, the person who posted that, if I wish I could ask a follow-up question or something and just hear a little bit more about the experience of meeting, like, that it sounds like it could just be a checking ritual in almost the most boring sense. Like, just checking and reading everything. And maybe I missed something and I'm not 100, but this wouldn't necessarily be. And right. So it might just be a checking compulsion. In which case, the same way that we would distinguish between other kinds of checking compulsions and non-OCD behavior that involves checking, which can sometimes exist too.
And again, remember, for OCD, you can never have enough information, right? There's always more. There's always more to find and to read. And so if you're reading something and you come across something and you get this like sense of relief and then wait, that goes away after a few, and then you start reading again and you get it again, and then you're okay, and then you have to get it again, versus a sense of awe when you're reading something like, wow, that was totally cool. Oh man, really neat. I'm excited about this, right? You don't often get that sense of excitement in OCD. You get a sense of relief in OCD, right? So that might be one way to talk, going back to, it feels like when you're reading something and you feel relief, that may be more in service of a compulsion, versus if you read something and you're more in awe of it and excited about it and want to know more from that kind of point of view, not because it brought a relief to you and maybe served as part of a compulsion.
I love that excitement piece. And I was thinking about that. I was working with someone recently who had navigated scrupulosity and was thinking about, well, I'm interested in going to theology school. I'm interested in going to seminary, but I'm afraid, what if that's compulsive? And we actually had this very same conversation. I said, well, why do you want to go? And they said, because I like talking about theology and it excites me. And I want to ask, I want to help other people ask questions. And it's really fun for me. And I think, at the same point, I think they were feeling this push and pull between, is it okay for me to do this because I have OCD and it can stir up my OCD? But we also don't want them having OCD to prevent them from engaging in something that brings them joy and that they feel really called to vocationally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I also think on the flip side, just because someone has OCD, they still may genuinely question their faith just as a human being. Mm-hmm. And it may be a very strong questioning as well. So you can never know. I 100%, I think at the end of the day, I think that, at the end of the day, it's important. There are certain important strategies, and, the best answer I can really give to even the most difficult of these questions is, use your framework, use your strategies.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts on this before I move on? Okay. So this is, I actually 723 Justin Hughes. Who are these cool people? I think was the best question.
Hello, Justin.
Mm-hmm. Hi, Justin, who's also a part of a lot of our faith and OCD work. I love, I think this is a really great question, kind of pertains to religion, but also lots of different types of OCD. So 721, can remembering the time before you had OCD count as ruminating, or can those memories be used as an anchor during times of uncertainty?
Those kinds of questions are really hard to answer without context for me, because the answer, I think, is either.
Yes.
So, yeah. So, can they count? Yes. Can they be used as an? Yeah, absolutely. So the function, the way in which you're doing it, the function of the specific things, an anchor. I'm taking that to mean something like, you can rely on that as a default, or use that as a guide for how you're going to act when things seem less sure. That sounds like a potentially great way to tolerate uncertainty and keep going toward your values or things that have worked in the past. But certainly, depending on what you're trying to remember, and it could be a mental compulsion too, a la ruminating. Yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Alex.
I've had OCD since like 5th grade, so it's honestly hard for me to remember a time when I did not have OCD, which is crazy because I definitely used to be able to remember a time in which I do not have OCD. But now that I'm getting older, that fraction of my life is, smaller. So I don't know. I'm not sure I can remember, at least in as clear detail as I used to be able to.
Yeah, my earliest memories of OCD are about when I was 8, and I'm 32, so I don't really remember a whole lot before that. But I think it's an interesting question because, and I agree, I think it can be both depending on the function and why you're doing it and how frequently you're doing it. But for me, I do think about sometimes times before OCD impacted my life to the extent that it eventually did. And I think about being present with loved ones, and not in a way that I do it repetitively, but sometimes I've used that as motivation for me to be able to get back to a place where I can do that again in a way that's value driven. So I use the example a lot of my mom is navigating an incurable blood cancer and has for a long time. And it's been a really tough journey with her. And sometimes when I'm struggling with my OCD, I think about times when I was able to really be present with my mom before my OCD took over my life. And then I think about those times that OCD took away my ability to be present with her. And I think about moving back towards being in a space where that time that I do have with her, I can actually be there and I can actually engage. And I think for me, that's not compulsive. That's about living into my values. But if I was continuing to think about that over and over and over again and checking to make sure I was really present, that's when it would become compulsive. Yeah, Patrick, I see you nodding. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, OCD pulls you away and tells you there's something more important to work on than what's going on right now in the here and now. Sure, your mom's got cancer, horrible, but what about this? And suddenly that is just, and then I think it's important because the diagnostic manual talks about anxiety and distress, but it doesn't talk about shame and guilt and other things too, which is so important. It comes into this. I mean, how many people have felt guilty for the thoughts and the things that have popped in their head? How many people have felt shamed because these things have popped in there? And like you said, Katie, everyone says to us, why can't I have any other kind of OCD, but this kind of, why does it have to be this one? And just as if there's something within them that made this happen and it's their fault or something like that too. So you always try to normalize those types of things again and go back to the fact of, yes, OCD does want to pull you away from enjoying time with your mom. Are you going to allow that to happen? And let me help you find ways to not let it do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And another thing I think is that, people can also feel ashamed of, well, I'm getting all these compulsions and I'm not, attacking them as well as I could be maybe, or, I'm not doing my therapy well enough and, I'm not good enough. I'm not, or, in some cases I'm not as good as I used to be. Right. So, I think that another important thing to really just understand is just be patient with yourself, love yourself, recognize, what, this is the situation you've been given. It's not supposed to be easy, but it's supposed to be possible. And it's supposed to, there's supposed to be, and there is always a ton of hope. So, like for me, this is probably going to last me the rest of my life. Off and on, maybe, but at the end of the day, I can still combat it. And it's not about, where I was, it's about where I am and where I'm, trying to move forward. And I think, we've got a lot of, oh, am I still there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And I think, we've got a lot more ability than we sometimes feel like we do. And, I think it's definitely possible. Even when it's tough.
Let's not forget two things. OCD will take over OCD treatment and say, well, if you want to get rid of me, fine, but you're going to have to do it perfectly, just so you know. So you're going to have to follow my rules to get rid of me, which is another way to prevent people from getting rid of OCD. And then the second piece is once you've gone through OCD treatment, the back door spike is, oh, wait, that thought doesn't bother you so much anymore? Well, maybe that's because now you actually like it. Maybe you really are a bad person then, because now you're not so bothered in the way that you were before. And you got to remember that all has to be brought into part of treatment with people as well too.
Yeah, it's funny. That was my Instagram post this morning. Are you ever anxious about not being anxious? Because I'm constantly anxious about not being anxious. And what does this mean about me as a person, that this no longer makes me anxious, right?
There you go.
So that's such a great example. And I think, go ahead, Alex.
I completely agree with that. I just want to clarify, to the people watching at home that, I feel like there's also, just feeling shame, just completely not related to OCD, and just like, I'm not doing well enough. I feel crappy. I feel terrible about myself. So, I think, am I there?
Yeah.
Okay. I think the important thing is to say not, I wish I still have what I had previously, but it's thinking about, you know what, I can still have this right now. I can still take my life back. And I don't need to have my previous life, because I can make that my life the way I want to live in the moment.
Yeah, I talk a lot about creating beauty out of brokenness, and there being this really neat opportunity for us to move forward after all of the things we might have navigated with OCD. And it might not be the same life, but it can be an even more beautiful life. And we can create that even through faith in some really neat and powerful ways. And going back to Patrick's point too, I think with a lot of the themes we're talking about tonight, there is this guilt and shame element. And I just want folks to hear that again, because we talk so much about anxiety, and the guilt and the shame can be so tough, especially with issues around faith, where you might feel like, well, this is different because I feel this shame, because I feel this guilt. And those were very much the primary feelings for me that took me away for so long from experiences of spending time with my mom that had nothing to do with anything I was doing in that moment. For folks who know my story, I lost someone in my life to suicide that actually prompted kind of a relapse for me, where I blamed myself very much for that loss. And I felt very tangibly responsible. And I spent 2 years in an OCD spiral, thinking I was a horrific person who deserved to be in jail, who didn't deserve to live. And I gave up so many aspects of being present with my students, with my mom, with all of the things that I actually cared about, because OCD made me feel like I didn't deserve it because of that guilt and shame. And I know so many folks, sometimes it's hard to fight because it feels like, well, I don't deserve it because of these thoughts that I'm having. I don't deserve it because of this guilt and shame. And I want folks to hear that you do deserve life, and to move towards these things that are important.
Thank you for sharing that, Katie. People, one way that you might ask yourselves, how much of that is going on for you, if it's not so obvious, is with just like a simple little perspective changing thing, where imagine you saying to somebody else, or somebody else saying to you, the things that you say to yourself. Right. And if the thoughts that, you're not worthy, you have no right to be happy. I mean, there are very few humans who've ever lived about whom most of us, I think, would judge that to make sense. Right. Even lousy people overall. And so when you're talking to yourself in ways that you would never talk to somebody else, and you would never stand to watch somebody else talk to a loved one of yours, then that might be a sign that you're treating yourself unfairly is the only word that's coming to mind, although I'm not sure that's exactly what I mean.
Do you motivate yourself by building yourself up, or do you motivate yourself by tearing yourself down? That's where you're going there, Jed, I think. And if you wouldn't motivate someone else by tearing them down, why are you doing it to yourself? You know, I call that specialness. When the rules of the world apply to me differently than they do to everybody else, there's a problem. And so it's fine if other people experience their faith this way, but I can't. It's different for me. The higher power has picked me out of all the billions of people on earth to experience faith differently than everybody else.
Oh, y'all, and this is so common for folks with OCD, and I've been there 10,000 times of, I can offer everyone in my community compassion and be with people through grief and trauma, but I have a different standard that I have to hold myself to, and I am not good enough, so I'm going to make myself miserable, almost as a compulsion. And it's such, the self-compassion piece is so interesting. And Jed, to your point, I was working with somebody recently, actually, and we were talking about if somebody else was going through the same thing that you were going through, what would you say to them? And it was really funny because the next time we met, they said, later that night, I met somebody who was going through the same thing I'm going through, and you must have planted them there. I think I didn't plant them there, but they said, you know, I had to be nice to them. And then I realized, oh, wait, I have to say that same thing to me. And we're so bad at that sometimes, folks with OCD, saying those same things to ourselves.
Yep.
Okay. I know we got off on a tangent here. If we have a couple more good questions, we'll try to get to quickly. I would love Eric at 746. Can you talk a little about obsessions that seem religious, but aren't really about faith? For example, feeling like God will punish you for making mistakes in your job, relationship, etc.
Well, the word feeling comes in there again. So we always have to, whenever we see that word, that's one thing to kind of pay attention to. And again, I find this as OCD trickery, right? There would be no greater slam on you than God being angry at you for mixing up a number in an equation at work. So what would the worst case scenario be for making a mistake at work? God punishing me. All right, well, since that's a what if that I can think about, sure, that makes sense. Now God's going to be mad at me if I even goof up something at work. And then my OCD is going to latch onto that. And now I got to do all these compulsions because I have to stay at work later and count the cash register until 4 a.m. to make sure it's just right. Otherwise, God's going to be really pissed that I missed a penny somewhere.
Yeah. Another thing about maybe another level to this question is that they're not just things that, seem religious, but really aren't, seem to us religious, but aren't, but some things, other people may perceive as religious, but actually aren't. Like, when my parents say, is this some sort of aspect of your religion? Is this some sort of aspect of your OCD? It can sometimes be, a bit of a double standard in terms of, a society. There are a lot of things that seem one way in society, don't seem another way in society. So I think that this kind of ties into a point I was going to make, which we had just talked about, which is, it is very important, I think, in some cases to use as an anchor, what are other people doing, and kind of use that as a reference point. That being said, I think it's also important to realize sometimes, I am a little bit different than other people, and I've got different needs from other people. And, just because I've got this one, friend who does this incredible amount of, like Torah study or whatever, studying all the sacred texts, does all, dedicates his life to doing this, very rigorous thing. That doesn't mean that I have to do that as well. And in fact, sometimes I even need to do less than other people are doing in order to not, make my life too difficult. Like if something, I need to challenge my OCD, I need to work on this one thing, sometimes I need, I can't do everything that everyone else does because I need to dedicate some of my time to doing therapy exercises. And so, it's important to realize, in some cases it is a good reference point to think about others, but in some cases we need to realize, what, I've got a challenge other people don't have. But, as it says in, the Jewish source, Ethics of the Fathers, Pirkei Avot, according to the effort is the reward, right? So, even though I may not be doing the exact same output as others, if I'm trying as hard as other people and dedicating myself, then that's good enough and just as good as anyone else.
Thank you, Alex. I'm mindful of our time. I'm going to try to, and I'm sorry, Skyla behind the scenes. I'm going to try to get in at least one more thing here because I think this is a really great question, and then we'll start closing out. At 7:54, I'd love to throw this to you, Jed. How do you balance creating exposure that doesn't break a religious rule or ritual, yet not making it in a way that is just a practice of ritual prevention?
So, I'm trying to think about how I can say that in a way that's not too closely attached to a specific example. I think the idea is that, so how do we balance creating an exposure without breaking the rule, but it's not just keeping from doing the rituals? So I think there are, I'll give you one or two examples from some of my Orthodox Jewish group folks I've worked with, where we find ways to do things that are not crossing a line that is actually prohibited, but is maybe still an uncommon thing to do. In the same way, by analogy, that we might be handling public toilet seats in ways that most people don't do for contamination exposure, but sort of overcorrecting by going kind of far, but not dangerously far. So we're not pricking ourselves with random needles we find in the street either, because that's unsafe. So an example of that might be things like, cooking chicken soup on one burner on the stove at the same time that you've got mac and cheese going on the other burner on the stove. You can't cross-contaminate in the kitchen sort of dairy meat if you keep a kosher kitchen. It would not be very common in a kosher kitchen for somebody to be cooking these both next to each other at the same time, but there's no actual prohibition. Another similar kind of example, without getting too far into the weeds about the exact religious rules, but touching some cheese and then without washing your hands, maybe just wiping that really quickly once on a dry towel or something, then picking up meat to prepare that or something. Wherever exactly those lines are, again, not really the point about the religious keeping kosher rules for the purposes of here, but we're looking for opportunities to break what OCD is telling you have to or can't do without actually violating the sin. So yeah, obviously it involves the ritual prevention as well, but we're going to try more actively and intentionally to find ways to do things that OCD is saying to you, no, maybe that's not okay. But the actual religious rules or your religious beliefs yourself, when you articulate them, or maybe it's in consultation with clergy, sort of okay. Maybe even for that purpose, you might say, how far can we go before it would actually be a violation?
And sometimes you can talk to a religious leader in order to help draw that line as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I wouldn't ask a Catholic to do a Ouija board, but they could go to a store that sells one, or and buy other things at the store, right? Or walk down the toy aisle and pick up a toy from the same aisle that it's in. So there are ways to look at that from that kind of point of view.
And I think it's great for folks to hear too, because sometimes there's a fear around engaging in exposure and response prevention, because there's a fear, my clinician's going to make me do something that's in opposition to my faith. And that's not the goal. The goal is to not cross these same lines that we're talking about, but to really help you get better so that you can live into a value-driven version of your faith.
Can I add one
piece
to that, Kitty? There's also people who are atheists and humanists and agnostics who don't prescribe to a faith, who still have religious scrupulosity, who are afraid, but what if I'm wrong? So every night they pray to a different higher power, just in the off chance that they might be wrong. So in those cases, no one is violating a faith in those things, and yet there's still compulsions being done, and we can still help people with ERP in those very situations as well.
Thank you, Patrick. And that's such a great plug for some of the resources that we're going to be pushing out in just a second at the end on all different faith traditions, including for folks who might be listening who identify as atheist and agnostic, resources on religious scrupulosity. So we'll close out in just a second, but I just wanted to give everyone one final minute if you have any closing thoughts. So closing thoughts to you, Alex. Anything you want to leave folks with?
I think communication is key. And as we were just talking about, I think our therapists really want to help us. And they're not trying to convert you away from your religion. And in fact, if you can get a faith leader and the therapist, even sometimes if you feel, if you feel uncomfortable, honestly, say, you know what, I'm giving you the other person's number and have them talk to each other, the therapist and the faith leader. And, or, you can talk to both of them. The important thing, I think, really is to have a strong support system. You can't do everything on your own, but you don't need to. At the same time, to, work hard, and say, you know what, I'm going to try my best. I'm really going to take these strategies and practice my exposures. And then to realize while I'm taking this process to move forward with my life, I can genuinely take back my life. I can live the life that I want to, even when it doesn't seem possible. And, just to strive for those values and to as well realize that those values are 100% possible to achieve, no matter what.
Thank you so much, Alex, for the inspiration, and you're just awesome. So thank you. Jed, final thoughts.
Yeah, I'm just going to echo one of the main themes, I think, which is that a lot of people with scrupulosity feel trapped between choosing their mental health and a life consistent with their values. And some have had bad experiences, maybe where somebody has pushed them in either direction. Either, you have to give up your values for your mental health, or you can't go get your mental health taken care of because it's a violation of our assumptions or religious rules or something. And it's so unfortunate, and it's not necessary. You should be able to, if you have scrupulosity, you should be able to treat it effectively using first-line treatments like exposure and response prevention in a way that is tailored to be effective, and also to allow you to stay living a life consistent with your values, and maybe even using ERP in furtherance of your values. Don't feel like you have to choose one or the other. You can and should have both.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jed. And Patrick, closing thoughts.
OCD doesn't care about you, your family, your friends, your faith, your higher power. OCD cares about OCD. And OCD will do whatever it can to get you to do one thing, which is to feed it more food. And OCD eats one food, and that food is compulsions. And therefore, whatever it can take advantage of to get you scared enough to do a compulsion to get an instantaneous relief, that is what OCD is going to pull on the strings of, so that you will feed it more compulsions so it can survive another day.
Thank you. Thank you, Patrick. I love that. That's awesome. And just for me to close, for folks again to hear what everybody's been saying, faith and mental health do not have to be mutually exclusive. You can engage in your faith tradition or engage in your life, maybe that's not affiliated with a faith tradition, right? And you can still engage also in exposure and response prevention and gold standard treatments to reclaim the big, beautiful, awesome life that you deserve. And I'm very much someone whose life was both saved and reclaimed through evidence-based treatment, and somebody that for a long time didn't want to go down that route, wanted to keep it a secret because of shame in my ministry and worrying about how people would view me. And I'm in a space now that really is allowing me to live into the person that I believe I was created to be. And I think for each of you watching, by engaging in those treatments, you get to be that full person that you really were created to be. So In closing out tonight, just wanted to remind y'all that tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 a.m. Pacific Time, lead advocates Chris Tronston will be joined by Dr. Patrick McGrath again. So Patrick,
More on me. Woohoo. Yeah.
discuss
Just what everybody wanted.
Patrick's all over the place. To discuss real event OCD in this month's Lunch and Learn live stream, you can submit questions ahead of time on social media at IOCDF or online at iocdf.org/peaceofmind. And registration is also open for the annual research symposium. We invite researchers and students to share data and findings from their latest OCD and related disorders research. This year's symposium will be a hybrid in-person and online event. And you can learn more at iocdf.org/symposium. And finally, registration is open for the 27th annual OCD conference taking place in Denver this July. The special event is for the entire OCD and related disorders community, including individuals, families, and supporters, therapists, and researchers. Learn more and register at iocdf.org/OCDcon. So we would love to see y'all there. I know we're all getting ready to head out to Denver and do wonderful things. And I guess even as an additional carrot, which I'm probably not supposed to say, but I don't think he's listening now, Ethan and I will be doing some karaoke parodies about OCD. So if that's an additional carrot for you to come, please join us. We have been working very hard and choreographing all of the things. So would love to have you there.
Please do one to Greece. I would love to see John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John as Ethan and Katie. That would be wonderful.
We have a little Shop of Horrors one going right now. So
Nice.
It's very, very exciting. So finally, sorry, Skyla, we've gone way over. This live stream is one of many. You can see the entire schedule of future streams at iocdf.org/peaceofmind. And you can also view recordings of past live streams on IOCDF's YouTube channel, youtube.com/IOCDF. You can remember to like and subscribe to get notified when live streams are scheduled. To be notified of when we're going live, just follow IOCDF on social media and subscribe on YouTube. And finally, if you need resources, please visit iocdf.org. I know Skyla all night has been dropping in the chat our awesome IOCDF resource page for faith and OCD, which everyone actually here tonight worked on in some way, shape, or form. And we're getting ready to launch new resources specific to different faith traditions, including atheism and agnosticism, which I know Patrick addressed a little bit tonight. So thank y'all so much for being here. And we hope to see all of you very, very soon in Denver. And have a wonderful night, a value-driven night, and please continue to fight your OCD because you really do, regardless of what OCD says, deserve to live a big, beautiful, awesome life. So thanks, y'all.